Good evening, everyone. I'm Rita Fleming Castaldi, and it's my privilege to be presenting tonight a webinar about students who struggle with exam prep, with exam success, and what are the contributing factors and proactive approaches that we can use as educators to support both academic exam success and certification exam success. As I said, I'm Rita Fleming Castaldi, and I'm doing this webinar on behalf of Therapy Ed, for which I am the Director of Occupational Therapy Education. I also am the editor of the review and study guides for both the OTA certification exam and the OT certification exam, and I'm an instructor for Therapy Ed courses. My status as an academic is I have a very long history in academia, which I'll briefly go over in a minute, but I am now Professor Emeritus at the University of Scranton. I've retired from full-time teaching. And my next chapter in my life is I'm very committed to preserving occupational therapy's history. I formerly served as the OT archive editor-in-chief for the AOTA Centennial. And when that ended, I became part of the OT Leaders and Legacy Society. I'm now chairperson of the OT Leaders and Legacy Society History Preservation Project, which periodically I send emails about our efforts to program directors. So I appreciate those of you who respond. But for tonight, I have a lot of passions, but tonight I'll be talking about my passion for helping students succeed. As I mentioned while we were waiting, I think life is too stressful as it is without having certification exam. The fear of not passing certification exam become part of someone's life. There's just too many other things that we need to balance. So I'm very committed to making it easier for students to succeed on the exam. Before I begin, though, I'd like to talk to the fact that Therapy Ed is not affiliated with NBCOT. Sometimes people think we are. I get emails and I say, no, I'm not. And NBCOT, as you know, is a registered trademark that is owned by the National Board for Certification in Occupational Therapy, as is COTA and OTR, being owned by the National Board for Certification in Occupational Therapy. Okay. So just a few logistics before we begin. To ensure a positive experience and decrease distractions, I have muted everyone's microphones, but please do turn on your mic during our question and answer and open discussion. And beforehand, if needed, if there's something that comes up and you need to put on your mic, please do. Do use the chat box to ask questions and make a comment and or share a strategy. I'll review those and respond to the chat box posts during our Q&A and open discussion, because I don't want to spend time doing that during the presentation, because I want to be conscious of the fact that there are some people who may have a time constraint and may have to leave before the formal presentation would be complete if I was answering questions along the way. So I have reserved 30 minutes at the end of the session to have an open Q&A and discussion, share stories, share strategies that work, okay? And before you do put something in chat box, do check and see if there is someone who kind of made the same post or comment or question, because that would avoid repetition and allow for more time for us to look at, have more diverse dialogue, and will also save the amount that we need to scan to get to a new question. However, if something is being presented that requires an immediate response, please do, unmute yourself, okay? Okay, I first want to begin with the title of this session. The phrase "students who struggle" I purposely and intentionally and deliberately used versus the phrase that most often is often what we see on on websites and on social media is, I failed the exam. So I purposely did not use the word fail, and I did not say students who fail the exam, because I really feel that struggling is more realistic. It conveys a message that supports can be provided and strategies can be used to manage challenges. I'm not saying the exam is not challenging for some people to pass, but they're challenges. It doesn't equate to being a failure. And unfortunately, when you say failing, it conveys a fate that reflects personal flaws, and often that's going to be difficult to challenge that outcome. Whereas we talk about struggling and that we can master those, manage those challenges, we can then change the outcome. So I prefer that in my language, as do the Therapy Ed instructors. And I'm also very conscious, because we do post the webinars we do for educators on YouTube, but we also post webinars that I do for the Student Conclave. I did one for the New York State OT Student Conclave, Inspire Student Conclave. I did one for the Nebraska OT Association. And those webinars go on the website as are also some specific things for students. But students, when they read the titles, they're not going to know what it was for educators. And I really don't think they need to see the word fail on, a social media account, a YouTube account. Language matters, as we know in all aspects. So that's one aspect about the language I'm using. You'll also see that I do use the word students in my title because a lot of the information that I will be providing does relate to helping students do better in their course exams, and how you can support them in developing effective strategies that will then work in their courses, but also work for the NBCOT exam. But you'll also see that I use the term exam candidates, and they're very distinct terms. We sometimes say that students are taking the NBCOT exam, but that's not actually correct. Students are still earning their degree as an OTA or an OT. Exam candidates have met all the criteria to become an occupational, to become an OTR or a CODA. They're eligible for the test. Therefore, they're no longer students, they're graduates. Okay. For some reason, when I go up to hit admit, my mouse is extremely sensitive and it moved me back to spots. So I apologize for that. Let me move forward. Okay. So, and that's an important thing to also share with students. And we'll talk about that because that really empowers them that you have graduated. You're not a student anymore. So that whole click of that they're in a new category is often quite affirming. Okay. All right, I'm going to just briefly talk about my personal background because some of you may know me, but I think many of you do not. I took my AOTCB, which is the American Occupational Therapy Certification Board, which was the precursor to NBCOT 43 years ago. Don't feel that old, but that's how long it was. For those of you who are within my generation, it was a paper and pen test. It was only given twice a year, January and July. And it was, for me, it's for everyone a high stakes exam, but it was extremely high stakes for me. Since I was working on a limited permit, what they called it at the time, temporary license. And I needed that job. Financially, this was not going to be something that I could wait 6 months not to work. I just was not in that socioeconomic category or had those supports. So I had to work. And in 1979 in New York State, if you failed, you were fired. The next day, you could not show up to work. And that was true for many, many years until it recently changed, fairly recently. So I needed that job. So I needed to pass. But the big question was, how do I recall all that I learned in my OT classes and on my fieldworks and then pull it together so I could apply it, what I knew, to pass an objective exam that will determine my future on my first attempt? That was really pretty stressful. And back then, the only exam prep that I found, maybe there were more in 1978, 79, but the only thing I found had a lot of questions in it that sent me looking at all of my books, including my prereqs, origins, insertion, which NBCOT never really asked. So, but I didn't know that. So I substantially and significantly overstudied. And the result was a lot of undue angst, a lot of stress that was not needed. And basically, I remember feeling like this. How do I keep it all together? And that was just the overwhelming feeling. Fortunately, I did pass and I moved on. Passing helped me, keep and grow in my mental health job. I became a very active fieldwork supervisor. I always tell students, become a fieldwork supervisor because it keeps you sharp because you learn from students, but also it makes you become a reflective practitioner. Because when a student asks you why you're doing something, you don't want to just say because it's Tuesday. So I had a very active fieldwork program, and that made me realize I needed to know more, which led to a post-professional master's, and which led to me adjunct teaching at LaGuardia Community College, Kean University, NYU, Dominican College, which eventually led to full-time teaching and eventually became a program director in 1993. After being a program director for 10 years, I did go back to full-time teaching, went to the University of Scranton, and University of Scranton was tremendously generous and paid for my PhD because that would have not happened for myself if I didn't have that support, and led to many amazing opportunities to pursue the other things that I am passionate about, such as presenting nationally and internationally about disability rights, empowerment, mental health, community-based practice. And it was an amazing opportunity. And I did just recently retire. But along the way of this long career, since 1979, I didn't really think about exam prep until I became a program director in 1993. I just really never thought about it, except saying when students were stressed to say, I understand, being kind and empathizing with them. I always thought that it shouldn't be as stressful. I never understood why it was, but I just always thought that was the reality. And to be perfectly frank, I was more interested in what I was doing about mental health and community-based practice and disability rights and advocacy and writing and presenting to even think about exam prep. But then I became a program director. And I learned that in your wheelhouse as a program director, if something's not in your wheelhouse just gets bigger as a program director. And there's more things that you do that you didn't think you'd be concerned about. So on day 2 of my becoming a program director, a group of students came to me and said, Rita, we have to talk to you. I'm like, uh-oh, what's this about? But it wound up, it was a very productive discussion. And they just said that it was a weekend college transition program coded to OTR. And they had gone to weekend college for 4 years. And they were like, we have the support network here. We're used to this routine. Can you please offer us a content review course for us to prepare for the exam? Because as parents and working coders and caregivers and a lot of things that were going on, it's like would really help us out. So I understood it. But at the time in New York, I was thinking, well, this SUNY Downstate in Brooklyn does a really, well-known on-site certification exam review course. And they're like, we don't want to travel to Brooklyn. The parking's better here. It's cheaper. So we wound up having downstate faculty come and present at our college. And we did that for 2 years. And then the downstate faculty said, you can do this on your own. You really can do that. So we developed our own course. And that we got a very nice reputation. We had students coming from all across the metropolitan area to take the course. And the reputation became strong that in 1998, Therapy Ed contacted me. They were based in Chicago. At the time, they were called IER, for International Educational Resources, because at the time they were doing a lot of international preparation of international therapists, PTs, to prepare for the PT exam. But now they've since changed their name. And basically the rest is history. They looked at what I had, said it needs to be better. I had the good fortune of being mentored by 2 Boston University professors who had done the PT book. And the first edition of the Review and Study Guide came out in 2000. So I've been doing the Therapy Ed review book since 2000 and doing exam prep since 1993, which is amazing to think, but that time flies by that quick, but it does. When I first became involved with Therapy Ed, and particularly with Ray Siegelman being my mentor, I quickly learned there were 2 aspects to exam preparation. In the Dominican College course, and I know many of you sometimes do these courses in your program, we did a content review. Okay, remember guys, it's all the stuff you learned 3 years ago in PEDS. And we did a content review and we had a couple test questions in there, but we really didn't teach about strategies for picking the best answer or any of those components. We were pure content review. And content knowledge is significant. We'll talk about that. But then I learned from the IAR course that is focused on completely learning, test-taking skills and develop an exam prep plan to master content and to effectively take the exam by doing. So it's a very interactive course, and it was so OT. And Ray, who developed the course, he was called a HOT, which was an honorary occupational therapist, because he was very into learn by doing. So I learned that 2 aspects really early on. And, big PR that Therapy Ed does, but I think it's true, is the book for the content, the class for the strategies, and then pass. And that's kind of the theory behind it. Right. What I want to talk about now, though, is current student exam realities. As we know, you have to practice in being licensed in the United States, DC, and United States territories. Every state, every territory, DC has a licensure. And licensure boards require passing the NBCOT exam. So the stakes are very high. You can't practice without passing the NBCOT exam. Now, this press has always been a reality. My concern that I was not going to be able to practice if I didn't pass. But the intensity and the immediacy and the cost have increased so much over the past 10 years because of social media. There's so many posts, so many blogs, so many messages and videos about the exam. It can really be overwhelming. So student stress has definitely, I've noticed because I've been doing this for 20 years, almost 30 years. well, 20 years, and exam prep with my students for 30 years. It'll be 30 years next year when I first started. The level, when I see students, the level of their stress is so much higher than it was definitely more than 30 years ago, 20 years ago, definitely more than 10 years ago. And the big issue that's really a big problem is most information that's posted is not vetted for accuracy of content or ethical practices. And I know those of you who are program directors, and I don't know if you shared it with your faculty. I know there are educators who are not program directors, so I don't know if your program director shared this with you or not. But there was a couple of recent e-blasts to program directors from the NBCOT, from Barb Williams, and about some of the unethical things of people misrepresenting themselves as NBCOT. And even the AOT's exam prep Facebook page, which is monitored by staff, had to be notified that content that was posted by very well-meaning students, a link, but that, they thought looked good, but they led the reader of that content, if you clicked on it, to predatory products. And I'm just going to give you an example of some of the things the students read. And it's, again, you don't know what you don't know. So this was one of the quotes that was online. Get the best guidelines on studying, and this is directly, the capitals is all there. Get the best guidelines on studying and preparing for your NBCOT exams. So again, you wonder about the grammar here. Turn your failed exam trails to a pass with just a single trail. Get the opportunity while it still stands. Failing doesn't actually mean you're not clever, but maybe you were not lucky to get the right tips for your test. That's why we're here. We have the best and most amazing services. And does the person who is doing the transcribing able to make it where it's not on my screen? Because unfortunately it's blocking part of my screen. So to assist you on the first accept, I would appreciate if you were able to reduce that, because I can't see part of my screen. Okay, if that doesn't work, that's okay. So anyway, there are predatory things, because that gets into people's fears, and you could tell by just the language and the grammatical errors that this is not someone who's an OT educator. Okay, but on a positive note, pass rates on the certificate exam are generally very good. For all exam candidates to take the exam and pass on the first attempt, the pass rate is typically over 80%. For exam candidates that take the exam within 1 year, the pass rate is typically over 90%. Unfortunately, there's no information about how many times it sometimes takes people to pass within the 1 year. So for this 10%, 10 to 12%, this can be a very, very high stress situation. I do know personally several students over the years who take the exam 2, 3, 4 times before they pass within the first year. That's incredibly expensive and very, very stressful. But the reality is most programs successfully meet the code standard A64, meet them. However, even programs with consistently outstanding pass rates have students who struggle to pass the exam. Is that, once in a while that outlier or a small cluster of students, and I have examples, but I don't want to take time doing that, but I can share some later about, and I will along the way, about reasons why. But this is very perplexing and often heartbreaking, because reality is sometimes these students did well and sometimes really, really, really well. I know a few students had every fieldwork was asking them to work for them in their courses and on their fieldwork. So we'll talk about why does that happen when we get into test taking personalities and some of the things we sometimes do as educators, meaning well, but maybe support students in a way that's not going to be most effective for the certification exam. So even in programs with outstanding pass rates, there's often students who we feel, who struggle, and we need to support them and hopefully prevent this and remediate before it happens. And then for programs that have low pass rates, particularly if you're a program that's going for accreditation the first time, really finding out the source of students' difficulties is a complex process, and it has hard to find solutions. And I'll share just one brief story. When I was program director, we always had 100% pass rate, unless once in a while we had an outlier where a student didn't declare a disability, which is why, and it was like, why didn't you do that? And I'll talk about that later. But 100%. And then there was 1 year where there was a cohort of students who didn't pass. And it was very, very perplexing, because there was another cohort that had outstanding pass scores. And why was that? And they were in the same exact classroom. We did a complete curriculum review. We looked at every single possible aspects of the program, and we still could not figure out what was the reason. Fast forward, because this was also when the test was only given twice a year. So we did our review course twice a year. Fast forward to 6 months later, the cohort who had failed front and center. And I went up to them and I said, what did we miss? What could we do better? And they're like, Rita, it wasn't your faculty's fault or yours. We just didn't study enough. They had borrowed the binder with all the things from the students who had taken the review course, and they just reviewed it. They did not realize how much you have to know things cold. And they did take responsibility for it, and they wound up passing. But sometimes, students are not that upfront, or you don't even get to meet them and see what the issues are. So sometimes the solutions are hard to find. So again, we want to be proactive to prevent them. Because the ramifications, if we do have that your program, results in that you have a poor pass rate, okay, they really can, or less than ideal, less than meeting the code standard, it can really tarnish your program and the institution's reputation, because they have to report those things also. And that can make recruitment of future students more difficult. As we know, that information has to be posted on the website. And this devaluation can have a financial impact for the institution. Deficits in exam pass rates can result in poor employment outcomes, which then place program and institution accreditation at risk, because again, they look at employment outcomes as one of the accreditation standards for different institutional accreditation boards. And in response to those cited deficits, you have to come up with action plans for remediation. That's a requirement, which of course is reasonable and expected. But these include extensive curriculum review, the development and implementation of additional coursework, and to hiring independent consultants. All increase the institutional cost of graduates failure, and I use failure in this context because that is how it is judged on the test. And when you give data to your dean, and your dean gives the data, and your accreditation self-study team has to report the data, is reported as a failure. But I always like to put things flip onto the positive side. These realities can be strategically used to obtain institutional support for purchasing reputable exam prep resources to ensure exam success. Can be strategically used and proactively used. There are many programs, and I'll be talking about one, I'm doing a webinar on November 15th that I'll share in a few minutes, and I'll share one program that did this from day one, from the very beginning when they began, that they obtained institutional support to be able to purchase exam prep resources, so they would from day one have a 100% pass rate or a very high pass rate on the exam. Okay, and there's personal ramifications. New grad, I'll be using NG throughout because it's safe space. So even if a new grad graduates, and when a new grad, to be honest, graduates from a program with good pass rate, their peers have all moved on, okay, and they're embarrassed, for failing exam that their peers passed. And there's a legitimate disappointment in, wow, I spent all this time studying and preparing to be an OT practitioner, whether it's 2 years or 5+ years. It's an investment that I made for a goal that I wanted. And that's very, very, very disappointing. And then there's the financial stress. Your student loans require payment regardless if you pass the exam. And again, it's required for licensure, so you can't practice. Now, some states have modified it, that they do allow you to practice on the limited permit. I know New York State revised that the last time we went into the Practice Act, and your students do get a year in which to pass to be consistent with NBCOT and the code guidelines. But not every state has that capability has that legal standard that you are able to still continue practicing. So you still do need to pay those loans. So in that ability to, and again, they require payment whether you pass, and also you may lose the job if you are in the limited permit. So that's just some background. So what is the goal for tonight? What I hope to do tonight is provide essential information and have a discussion with you about the many factors that contribute to difficulties with academic and certification exam. I also want to talk about and really increase your awareness of how sometimes we as educators unknowingly support test-taking personalities that can hinder exam success and contribute to development of ineffective exam habits that don't serve students well on the certification exam. I want to discuss strategies and resources that can be used to help identify students who will struggle to pass the certificate exam before their first exam attempt, a proactive approach to be preemptive. One of those very important ways to be preempted is having exam candidates obtain those testing accommodations if they're eligible. It's so sad when people come to a therapy course and they say to me, I failed the exam, and a lot of students are very upfront about it, and they'll share with the peers that are there. And they'll say, yeah, I didn't take a course because I always did well. And I had a disability, but I never used accommodations during my program. And I failed the exam. And my teacher said, go take a course, or my peer said, go take therapy a course. You don't want to fail again. It's too expensive. And they come and it's like, oh, I wish you would have gotten this advice earlier. So I'm going to really push that tonight. Make sure we need to know, to let exam candidates know they need to get the testing accommodations. And I'll have a series of slides about that, and how important it is and why there's a difference between not needing them in your program and then needing them in MBCOT. We're going to be using our activity demands and analysis of our activity demands and analysis of environmental context, and to look at those differences. And then I want to talk about proactive approaches and effective resources that educators can use to support students' development of exam preparation and test taking capabilities, and mitigate factors that can contribute to exam failure. So today's focus is going to be on student, exam candidate, and exam preparation. So we're focusing on students and exam candidate preparation and their test taking performance. We're not looking at curricular issues. The curricular issues are very, very important, because as I have sent out to program directors, and if your program director hasn't shared it with you, Dr. Marlene Morgan, a colleague of mine from the University of Scranton, and I have put together resource guides for program development and curriculum development and evaluation for developing pre-accredited and accredited programs, because you can either have curriculum drift when you've had a program for a long time where the curriculum drifts, or you can have significant gaps in your curriculum. So we have a number of resources in those guides that can help you assess how you can make sure that your curriculum is covering what you need to do. And so embedding preparation into the curriculum in a manner that's not teaching for the test. I did a Conversations That Matter at AOT Inspired that maybe some of you were at. It was very well attended and a lot of good dialogue. We don't need to teach for the test, but we want to make sure that we have an effective curriculum, we have an effective way to evaluate our curriculum, and we have a very effective way to support our students develop the skills they need to succeed on the exam. So that's going to be the focus. So you go to the literature and you look up, what does it say about effective exam preparation? Unfortunately, it doesn't say much, okay, as far as research goes. I've published in OT Practice a couple of things, and Kathy Post just did a very good thing on Student Pulse about testing accommodation. But as far as research goes, there's not much. And despite that, all OT programs have a vested interest in their graduates' MBCOT exam success. The published research is only focused on factors related to the OTR exam. There is no research on the CODA exam and the experience of CODA exam candidates. No. And if somebody finds something that I missed, let me know. Information about how exam success can be facilitated by educators, regardless of the level at which the exam is also very limited. Research has primarily focused on predictors of and contributors to new graduates' exam success. There are 2 studies that I found that I'm going to do a little more literature review before November 15th to see if I missed any, about programs that did embed OT preparation in the curriculum by offering a course or a seminar. And I'll review those during the November 15th webinar. Okay, so I'm going to briefly go over the literature. And again, this is going to be recorded and posted, so you'll be able to access the full reference list that I'll be showing at the end. Rich Towers of 2022 found no statistically significant relationships between first-time pass rate of 170 new grads, a master's CODA to OTR bridge program. So I was particularly interested in this since Dominican was a CODA OTR bridge program, and their OTA associate degree, their bachelor's degree major, or the elapsed time between earning their bachelor's and starting the master's program. And they had hypothesized that maybe there would be a correlation if someone had a science-based bachelor's degree versus a liberal arts bachelor's degree, but there's no correlation on any of those things. Kowalski, Burt, et al. Found key differences, though. They did find differences between GPA, ACT and SAT scores, OTC scores, and first level fieldwork scores between new grads who passed the MBCOTR exam on their first attempt So 85.1% of their cohort passed, and 14.9% did not pass, and they saw correlations on all of those factors. Novelis et al. Did a logistic regression model and included pre-admission factors such as letters of recommendation and writing samples, and post-admission factors such as GPA and how difficult was their master's program difficulty, and fieldwork self-report. So this was people who had a master's in a prerequisite type or related field and then went into the OT program. So how difficult was that master's level program? And the self-reports. And it was able to predict 86.2% of the new grads exam outcomes. So 30% better than just flipping a coin. So that was a finding. Avi Itzhak, and I do apologize for mispronouncing someone's name. I have a terrible habit of not pronouncing words well. Found that a logistic regression model that used student performance on the 4 ACHI domains. So basically it looked at how they did in each of the 4 domains. To predict the exam success outcomes, they had a moderate prediction rate for the first 2, the evaluation one and the treatment planning domain, and was only for 2. And it was more effective first time pass status. So did 92% of the time for those 2 domains predict pass status versus no pass status. And that had a sample of 65. Important to note that all of these studies were conducted at single institutions of higher education that granted graduate degrees. Again, no CODA data at all. And because they were single institutions, as we know, these results can't be generalized. So the conclusion of all of these and the implications of these studies, they're all very well written studies, and the analyses are very thorough and very complete. So they do discuss their implications, but they are limited, and more research is needed to support the findings. Okay, so we have these research gaps, okay, and what are we going to do about that? So because we know the level of knowledge and test-taking skills that students bring to MBCOT exam, their preparation and the administration is inextricably linked to academic preparation. It's this foundation, which is what it's supposed to be. Did they learn what they needed to learn to be able to practice? But the current literature provides no insights into what we as educators know about the opportunities and challenges students face when preparing for and taking their MBCOT exam. And that gap is significant. My colleague and I, in the Therapy Ed team, we meet every year for a summit. Therapy Ed is very generous and pays for all of us to attend a summit. Of course, recent years it's been virtual, but we've been doing this now for over 20 years. Once a year, we get together and we process and talk about things and how we can make them better and how we can improve to better serve students and program needs and educators' needs. And the big question comes up is, how do we effectively help students with the exam, help exam candidates, if we understand what their experience, particularly from the educator's perspective? We get a lot of firsthand knowledge from students, but there's nothing that says, do other people or other educators aware of this and what's going on, and what are the unique maybe challenges between geographic or between OTA, OTR exam candidates? To address this need, Dr. Marlene Morgan, my colleague from the University of Scranton, proposed we complete a pilot study to obtain educators' perceptions of students' opportunities and challenges related to their certification exam preparation. So we conducted this study, I guess about 18 months ago or so. And we used the Delphi method, and we used a convenience sample of the 15 OT educators who are Therapy Ed instructors. It was convenient because we said to be able to do a full range study, we need to first have data, not just our opinions. And consistent with the Delphi method, data was collected via 3 rounds. Analysis was complete after each round. For detailed report of the study and its findings, this is the link to access and review this Delphi study. And that link was also included in the first invitation to participate in this session. So if you go to that original email, you can click right on this link. Do know that to access the report's interactive hyperlinks, you must download the linked document. So we have, if you just want to read a certain part of it, you can click on it, and then you can go back to the beginning if you want. Okay. So what do we find? We find that The therapy ed instructors who participated found that the opportunities that they thought that were available to both OT and OTA students were understanding how the exam is constructed. We do see, and I concur with these findings since I participated in it, but we do see that students, for the most part, understand the subjective exam, that it's, online and computer based. So they have a good sense that how the exam is constructed for the most part. Sometimes the CST items that are unique to the OT exam and the 6th option multi-select, they're less familiar with, but overall, most students understand about how it's constructed. They also do seem to have a good understanding that they should individualize their approach to exam prep. And many are also aware of technology, on-demand computer-based exam. Again, these are perceptions. This is not, we don't know how many students feel this, but we do get a sense when we teach that these are the things that students kind of have a good handle on and that they view these positively. The challenges, though, that we hear is the cost. Okay. And there's just so much out there, and it's not cheap. That's why I will be talking about how to save money and how to increase efficacy of exam preparation. And the other thing that's a big challenge is how to develop and implement an individualized study plan that's unique and targeted to person. Definitely content knowledge gaps. There's a lot to know and there's a lot to remember. I know for my students at the University of Scranton, and this is true for many schools, whenever we do the PED section in the therapy ed course, you often get a collective moan where people are like, oh no. And even on Zoom, you can hear it sometimes because there's a lot in PED you have to know. It's a very challenging, very dense and very specific. One reflex is at one time period, another reflex at another time period. There's a progression of grasp across the palm. You have to know those things. So, if you haven't studied that in 3 years, you're going to have some gaps about those details. So that's always a major stressor. And then how to develop those test taking strategies, and then how to manage anxiety, stress, and time. So these are the things that came out that consistently across the board for both OT and OTA students that the instructors perceived as the main challenges and opportunities that exam candidates face. And unique opportunities were reported for both OTA and OT students. Our next step, though, because this is what we want to do, we really want to do a nationwide survey to really see what's happening in your programs and what you perceive as being your students' opportunities and challenges related to NBCOT exam prep. So we're using this pilot study to really help inform how we design this study. And of course, everything has to be IRB approved and, and fitting in with, people's other schedules, but that is our goal. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability, and maybe we'll be able to partner with a school. There is no ability for us to contact students about their experience. We don't have access to that. So we have to give and access to people that we have, the audience we have, educators. But I do think that, particularly if you are, very engaged with your students and, you have a good sense on the pulse of what's going on. Okay, so I want to go over the main reasons why students do not succeed, why they struggle. There's an inherent disconnect between the nature of OT and OTA education and the OTR and certification exam. Yes, those exams are based on a practice analysis of what OT practitioners do in practice. And yes, that content outline of the exams are based upon that practice analysis. So they do definitely relate to practice. But if you think about your program and our best programs, and our best teachers and our best courses, and the ones the students maybe hate, but also love because they know they're learning a lot, is when it asks you to think about every nuance, every possibility. What about this? What about that? Okay. They're taught to think holistically, client-centered, individualized, all those types of aspects. And then they're giving 2 sentences and say, pick the best answer. That is a definite disconnect. And it's not in many students' comfort zone. It is particularly becomes a greater disconnect when you think about that when students complete their coursework, where maybe they were taking classes that had exams of pick the best answer out of, the 2 sentences, and they had that enculturated and they had that as a habit, but then they go on field work, and if you have that both field works are at the end of the program, you're talking a number of months for both the OTA education and the OT. And then if you have an ODD program, add the capstone on top of it. So there are many, many months where students have been removed from taking an objective exam. So there is that disconnect. And when you explain that to students, they do feel comforted. It's like, okay, it's not just me, there is an inherent disconnect, but we have to work that through. So we'll talk about how to do that. And then there are gaps in content knowledge. Now, this can be due to the student, struggling with a particular course, or curriculum issues. Those of you who are program directors and educators, you probably somewhere along the course of your academic career, and if it hasn't occurred yet, it will occur, where you're asked to teach something that's not quite in your area of expertise, but there's no other option except cancel the class. So you kind of jump in and do it, and you do the best you can. Or sometimes it's curriculum drift, or an adjunct who you hired winds up they're, just presented well, but they're not doing well. So sometimes there are those issues. Both require action. Today, I'm only going to talk about student issues. The latter, talking about curriculum issues, I'll talk about during the November 15th webinar. And I'm also going to be joined, by the way, by a couple of program directors that have used their PN and have had some of these challenges, and they're going to also chat as part of the panel. So having that gap in content knowledge, whether curriculum issues or student issues, it's a problem. That's why students struggle. And then there are the difficulties that students experience with developing and implementing that individualized and targeted exam preparation plan. They may know they have the opportunity to do that, but actually actualizing it and doing it is a whole nother story. Okay, how do you do it? And then those test taking strategies, how do you pick that best answer? That's a challenge. And there are strategies for doing it, but you have to learn those and practice those. And then stress management skills and time management. People have difficulties with managing stress and time, and those can hinder exam success. And the big one, as I said, not obtaining testing accommodations when eligible. And then another very big one that relates very much to how we interact with students in our classes when we give them tests and give them tests back is counterproductive test-taking personality. So I'm going to cover all of these. Okay. So first, I'm going to focus on the MBCOT exam stress and disconnect between OT education and the exam. And I kind of said this already, but just, we have to recognize the exam anxiety associated with the high stakes MBCOT exam is undeniable and justified. As I said, their students' holistic education develops their vital practice skills, but it's counterintuitive to reductionist exams. And no matter how inclusive MBCOT is with, making sure that answers are client-centered and therapeutic yourself, by nature, objective exams are reductionist. So I have found very much so. Again, this is all anecdotal because we have no ability to, access students' MBCOT exam scores and their school, their school records. But I do know that when I teach at programs that have problem-based learning as their foundation, and problem-based learning is phenomenal for developing critical reasoning, clinical reasoning, but the limited experience that students have with objective exams in that model does put them at a disadvantage. They struggle more. As long as you know that and then deal with it in a proactive manner, it's not an issue. But where it's not dealt with or students don't engage in a way that proactively addresses this issue, it does become problematic. And again, even experienced competent test takers, I've had students who've had A's on all their tests in their background, but they struggle with the exam because their anxiety level gets so high. This is particularly true with A students. It is so hard when you say to students, and you do a course and you say, or when we do Therapy does online office hours for free on Tuesday nights. And when we say during the office hours during the course that you don't need 100%, you don't need 90%, you don't need 80%, you don't even need 70% to pass the exam. You can see with some students that makes them very, very anxious, because they're used to getting A's. And if you think about it, we require B- or better to stay in a program. So getting a C is really very anxiety producing. Getting something wrong is very, very anxiety producing. So, and we'll talk about, strategies. And actually, I'll say it now in case I do forget this one. I had a student who was an outstanding student at the University of Scranton and contacted me about 9 months after had graduated and disclosed that they had failed the exam 3 times. And I was like, wow, what happened? And I did remember one precipitant. There was a major crisis that the person had in his personal life, but I didn't want to judge if that was what had happened. And they wound up saying that they took the exam too soon after that crisis, that they really weren't prepared and they should not have done it, and they failed. But then what happened? Everybody's saying, don't worry about it. And again, this person hired by all their field works, A+ student, hired by, just fantastic. And now is, head of a wonderful rehabilitation department in a major city. And has presented at AOTA and had hundreds of people standing room only at presentations. But the anxiety from that failure, when he went to take the certification exam the second time, and he saw a question that he wasn't confident about, he started spiraling to say, I'm not going to pass. I'm not going to pass. I'm not going to pass. And he just spiraled and he failed again. Everybody's like, oh, just don't get nervous. You can't tell people not to get nervous when they get nervous. But that was the advice. And then he failed a third time. He disclosed to a couple peers, and the peer said, contact Rita, just talk to her. So once I learned, and once he told me what his experience was and what the challenges were and why he was struggling and not passing, right away, I was like, you know what? Once you see a question and it gives you any sort of anxiety, hit next. Pick a letter, because if you can guess, and if you guess right, you get the point. Just pick your favorite letter without even reading the choices. Pick A and hit next, because you don't have to get the 100%, the 90%, the 80%, 70%. So rather than spiraling about, oh, I may not know that, oh my gosh, I'm going to fail again, next. And then the next one, and if the next one's hit again, and then you're going to center because you know your stuff, and you're going to find questions that you know the answer to. And he did, and he actually passed with an excellent score, but because he had to stop the spiral. So we need to be conscious again that with students who struggle, but what's the nature of their struggles is important. And students are acutely aware that there are peers, either the class before them, among their peers, someone on their fieldwork says, oh yeah, I failed 2 times, but now I'm okay. They know someone who was a solid academic record who failed their certification exam. So that anxiety is very real. We need to respect that and acknowledge it and then work it through. The other thing that is critical to think about is the relationship between exam preparation, test taking anxiety, and over information. As I mentioned in one of the first screens, there's so much now online with Twitters and blogs and Facebook, and I don't know, there's so many things. Reddit. Actually, I asked my stepson, I said, Daniel, I'm working on this over the weekend. So I have the little symbols, I said, of Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. I said, Instagram. Is there anything else that maybe people would go online to look up exam prep for? And he thought about it, he goes, yeah, Reddit. And boy, I went into Reddit, and oh my gosh, it's a rabbit hole, which is what the students call, they're looking for. I could not believe, and some of the stuff was not helpful. Some of it was okay, but some of it was, wow. There's a lot of stuff out there. So it can be really overwhelming. It can be just like a rabbit hole. So the press to use all or most available resources can increase exam preparation stress. So we, as educators, can help students really separate the wheat from the chaff. It's critical. The other thing that also increases stress, there's so many study templates that are available on social media. And I don't go on social media, but once in a while, I'll have a student contact me and say, oh, did you see so-and-so on, AOTA's Facebook page? So I'll go to that once in a while. There are very, very many. There's a whole section on AOTA's Facebook page, which I'm sure many students find helpful, about people's study plans. But sometimes if you look at those study plans, I don't personally know how people afford it and how they found the time. But there are ones where people buy every single thing, and then they talk about what they did each day related, say, to burns from every single product. AOTA, OT Mary, Therapy Ed, OT Podcaster, the Purple Book, they just go through it all. And those templates can be really overwhelming. And they're also not tailored to someone's unique strengths and limitations. And I'll talk more about that, about developing an exam preparation plan. So overinformation can really exacerbate anxiety. The other thing that can exacerbate anxiety and test taking anxieties and effective preparation is misinformation. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And actually, I find that I try not to look at it very often, but people wind up saying things to me and share and sending me stuff. And is this true? And it's like, no, it's not true. And then I go online and I shake my head. One of the things that's on a popular, exam prep provider who markets to students is some people are just bad test takers. That is so untrue. Because to be eligible for the NBCOT exam, an exam candidate must graduate. They have to be graduated. They can't even owe money on a library book. You have to have that transcript from an accredited OT or OTA program, which means they've taken tests and passed them. Even a problem-based learning approach, OT curriculum, you had to get into that program, pass your neuroanatomy and anatomy and your kinesiology tests. The science classes always have tests. So you needed to get in, you need to get your undergrad degree and pass. You took tests there to get into the graduate program. So no one's a bad test taker, but the reality is they may not be in your comfort zone or a preferred activity. I think that's probably true of most OTs because people go into OT and gravitate to OT. We tend to think more globally, and we tend to think about, writing a treatment plan and developing an activity and leading a group is much more within our comfort zone than, boom, 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 boom. But it doesn't mean that you're inadequate just because you don't prefer it. And that's an important qualitative difference to students to say, I never did good on tests. Couldn't be you never did good on tests because you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be in this program. Okay. The other thing that I've seen on, again, a person who promotes themselves to students is questions on the certification design are designed to get students to second guess themselves. This is not true. We emphasize very, very much during Therapy Ed's course and in our book, but in our tutoring, when we speak, it's in our book, but it's much more real when you're in person because students, they always get a sigh of relief when you say, the NBCOT exam is clear, it's fair. Every single item is written by an occupational therapist or an occupational therapy assistant who is not out to trick you or confuse you. They just want to make sure you know the content you need to know to practice competently. And every single exam item is written by someone who's been trained in how to write items. They're all vetted by peer review before they go on to the exam. They all have to have page numbers from the textbooks that you as educators identify when NBCOT gives you that survey about what textbooks you use. They all have to have a page reference from those textbooks to support what is in this item. It can't be just something I thought about it because I did it yesterday. So they have to be supported by books that are used in education programs. And then they go on the exam and they don't count. One of the 3 CSTs on the OT exam doesn't, well, actually, I shouldn't say, NBCOT doesn't say exactly how many. They used to say 1. And I just asked Barb Williams recently, and she said she doesn't like to say that they're a number. And I think that's because sometimes they're like vetting like sections of a CST item. So parts of the CST items may not count because they're vetting them. And definitely a number of multiple choices in both the OT and the OTA certification exam don't count. And that's because they want to make sure that these are sound items before they count. So the exam is clear, it is fair, because any lack of clarity is corrected before the exam counts. Before the item counts. Before that's considered pre-operational and being field tested. So that's just a myth and a misinformation. There's another person who says that the NBCOT exam requires specialized knowledge and actually has a whole section on the NICU. The NICU is not entry-level practice. It is not generalized practice. It's specialized. It is not true that you have to have specialized knowledge on the NBCOT exam. The NBCOT exam tests generalist, entry-level OTR and CODA knowledge. So anything that requires certification is not on the exam. All right, so I want to talk a bit about test-taking personalities because this is where you as educators can have a big impact on students' preparations. Many test takers have established test-taking personalities, often from childhood, that can hinder their exam success, okay? The rusher, the turtle, the philosopher, the lawyer, the second guesser. We may unknowingly support these personalities or knowingly support them in the beginning of the curriculum. So allowing post-exam debate to result in credit given for alternative answers, extended time for completion, but it's not an ADA accommodations, but I want 5 more minutes, 5 minutes. I'm not going to discuss these traits due to time constraints or the impact on test taking, and this information is in the review and study guide. What I do want to say is that we should not be giving people extra time, and we should not be debating questions with them, because you're not going to get extra time on the exam. You're not going to be able to debate an exam question. So we do review strategies during therapy aids reviews in our study guides and exam prep course. And practicing using these during our course and when taking the review and study guides online practice exams enable the habituation of these strategies so that it's second nature when students take this certification exam. Habit training works. Habit training is not sufficient for the squisher procrastinator. The cramming and last-minute assignment completion that have worked for years will not work for the MBCOT exam. Why not? Well, there are significant qualitative and quantitative differences between course exams and the certification exams. So squishers and procrastinators must be identified prior to taking the MBCOT exam, and we know who they are, given a care and firm reality check, and have solid resources. And the reason the difference are relate to also differences for those without accommodation, who don't go for accommodations. Decision to request or not request testing accommodations for MBCOT exam is often influenced by students' personal experience with teaching test accommodations during their education. But again, this experience is not generalizable to the MBCOT exam. The content, format, and test taking experience of the MBCOT exam differs from the objective exams that are typically used in courses. So this is straight from our book. We strongly advise all eligible students to get any and all accommodations for which they're eligible. Okay, so using our activity demands and our environmental context, course exams typically are very specific, well-defined content, just PEDS, just reflexes, just fine motor. There's not a lot of cognitive shifts required. If there is a comprehensive exam at the end, it's usually based on prior quizzes and tests for which you see feedback, and it's just usually multiple choice. However, the MBCOT assesses the depth and breadth of practice, and there's many, many cognitive shifts. Every multiple choice item is unique. And the simulation test items on the OTR exam and the 6-option CODA one are very unique. They're very novel. And then the environment. When I'm taking an exam for my course, it's in a familiar environment. I'm either at home or in a dorm or in a classroom. And you're able to freely, enter freely when the class, space is available. You can often self-select your seat, often have your favorite seat, and you're surrounded by people taking the same tests. When you go to the MBCOT Prometrics, to take it at Prometrics, it's very unfamiliar. You have security that you need to complete to enter the exam room, maybe still COVID precautions. Self-selecting computer station is slim to nil. You're not going to get a perfect thing. And you have strangers around you taking different tests, getting up, going back and forth, LSATs, MCATs. And this difference in those activity demands is why squisher procrastinators doesn't work. Because when again, those students I talk about from Dominican College, you have to know stuff cold. You can't be thinking about what was that third bullet between C5, C6, C7. Who uses universal cup? You can't take time to do that. You have to know that. Otherwise, you're going to run out of time because there's a lot of cognitive shifts. Okay, fortunately, we need to make sure that we inform and advise disabled students there are testing accommodations to obtain these. So do inform them about the information I just said about the qualitative and quantitative differences between the activity demands and environmental context of the MBCOT exam versus course exams. Do let them know to not let their decision to request testing accommodations be influenced by others who say, oh, you never used them in class, you don't need them. No. The difference is there. Well, this may be true for some. It's not a given for all. There are students with disabilities, I mentioned, who've been persuaded to not use them, and they've needlessly failed the exam. You want to tell them, seize the opportunity to obtain the reasonable, appropriate, and free accommodations that enable them to pass on their exam. It's too emotionally, financially, and socially expensive to fail, so why risk it? Okay, fortunately, again, TAs is easy. Detailed information in the testing accommodation handbooks on the website. That you do have to find a detailed report by a qualified professional that gives a substantial justification. But the nice part is MBCOT now accepts pre-existing reports up to 7 years prior to the application date. So usually that documentation that students had from their during their post-secondary education will be accepted, which is quite nice. It saves a lot of time and money and a lot of stress. These are the testing accommodations. This is straight from our book, pre-approved, personal, and different things that are able to be gotten that could be given. They do also include a provision of a reader. And as of January 3rd, 2022, NBCOT does allow people who have the visual accommodations to select the background and font colors to enhance the visual presentation. Recently, Barb Williams presented on September 29th at the ALC meeting, and she stated there was an overall increase in requests for testing accommodations. And nature of the request is 51% request increased time, 30% request a separate room, 9% flex break, stopping the clock. And the 4 conditions that are associated with testing accommodations: ADHD, anxiety disorders, reading learning disorders, and depressive disorders. And knowing those, those are not often visible disabilities. So again, connecting with your students is vital. So I'm going to talk briefly about resources that can support both the success of students with disabilities and without disabilities. Information about how all these resources can be embedded into curriculum and how you can obtain institutional funding to support them will be discussed on November 15th. Okay, so as I mentioned, for over 22 years, I've been doing the Therapy Ed Review and Study Guide. I do have a team of content experts who make sure that what we're providing is current and accurate about the exams and the content, format, and procedures, that we fully cover what is needed to pass the exam, and that we impart effective test taking and time management strategies by giving 3 practice exams that students can take and practice within the allotted time. I'm very proud that our review and study guides are efficient. They really is one text that does cover it all, that may be tested on the exam. You don't need to have what I had, multiple books and trying to figure it all out, okay, and cards and all that. Purchasing multiple products is expensive. We're the only single purchase exam preparation that includes content that's required to pass the exam. There's content-specific questions at the end of each chapter to jumpstart studying. We include a lot of information about effective test management and time management strategies so they can complete the exam. We have review questions and mini exams and 3 full-line online exams with extensive rationales. Now, admittedly, the book is thick. It can be very daunting. It's important to know that almost half, there's only like 20-page difference, include extensive rationales about correct and incorrect answers to the online practice exams. There's a lot of tables and figures in there to highlight must know. And we have now must know exam hint and caution and red flag boxes. And I'm going to actually skip through the steps because I'm seeing time because I don't want to keep you over. And I always wind up giving examples, and I'm a storyteller. So, but those boxes really highlight, and students should be told to make sure they read those because that's the must know information on the exam. I want to talk about our online assessment exams because they are really very helpful for you as educators. These are the practice exams. I'm sorry. These are the practice exams that the students get. Again, there's 3 of them. Okay. And they do mirror the NBCOT exam, and you do get a score report with them, and the students get those, and they can be used for up to a year, 18 months. And the mini exams are the same. I want to talk about the assessment exams. These were developed because there were people who would express concerns about the OTKey, specifically the score reports. That the score reports with the domains, it's sometimes hard to understand what does it mean because domains are so broad. So because of that, we developed 2-hour exams that exclusively available to education programs, and the OLXs can be taken in double time or half time and a half. And they were based on 2 hours because that's what program directors said, that they often are able to do an exam. They are purposely designed to mirror the exam, so they contain exactly half the number. And they're very diverse in their critical reasoning and content, and we do match the NBCO domain percentages. They're free for your first group cohort, and then afterwards they're competitively priced at $20. What I really like and very proud about in the portal, there's a very clear intro to describe the purpose, format, and content to set the stage for students. They go with a positive view of it. And there's very concrete step-by-step directions for how to answer the different types, CST versus 6 option. So to make sure that what you're really testing is their content knowledge and test taking skills, not understanding how am I supposed to answer this type of question. So I'm very, very proud that our directions are very, very, very clear and very well received. As I said, they're half the exam. So the OTLX has 100 multiple choice and that includes single response and 6 option. And the OTLX has 1.5 clinical simulations and 85 to represent the 3 CSTs and 170. And we have two. So it can enable you to do and figure out where it fits best in your curriculum. Post-academic coursework, pre-field work. A lot of people use it pre-therapy ed prep course, post-therapy ed prep course. Now, this is what I want to highlight, and then I will go through the rest quickly, and then at least and I can stay later if people want. After you get an assessment exam, you get very comprehensive reports about the person's individual performance and the class and the program director, and the class cohort. And what I want to emphasize here is these 9 content categories. We give you about 5 critical reasoning skills and the 4 NBCLT exam domains, OT3. But if you see here, human development, process OT, musculoskeletal, these link to the chapters in the book and to content. So you can see how students are doing in content areas. Okay. And the other good part is you get a score with name of all the students, and you can see how long they did it. This faculty member asks for program to not have time limit on it. So you can see right here, whoops. If you look at how much time this person took 4 hours and 23 minutes. Now, if this person did not declare that they have a disability need for accommodation, that's clearly a red flag. And these are, again, the evaluation reports. This is the students had not studied. They had done this before their field work. Okay. Now, important thing to know is that the contextual is always know that no matter what exam that you use, the temporal context must be considered when interpreting scores. If they do this before their didactic coursework or fieldwork, students may not understand the item. There may be a lack of knowledge in their scores if they haven't studied. If they haven't learned strategies, about how to pick that best answer, they may select incorrect answers. And again, that time management skills. You saw most of those students were over 2 hours. But so I often wonder, is it best to give this before students actually take an exam prep course or study? But I know some program directors like giving it, and they have said this to me many times, like giving the OLX before students go out on fieldwork, because it gives the students kind of a sticker shock that their low scores is kind of wake-up call that when I have time on fieldwork, maybe I should be studying stuff that relates to my fieldwork, and I got to make sure I come back and take this prep course because I need to do this. This reality check is also very important for squishers and procrastinators and for the students who think maybe they don't need testing accommodation. Okay, the prep course covers both aspects of mastering content and review and having a study plan and how to effectively answer. Again, it's very interactive, and I'll just move on. It is offered on site and online, and there are school discounts. It includes, the fee includes the book, and if a person has the book, they get credited for it, and so the purchase price for the registration fee is less. There are book discounts, and they also get a course manual, and this is key. This has tons of information that has study hints, tools for making an individualized exam preparation plan, and to do self-assessment. An important thing to know, and I know for some reason we have to advertise this better, because I've just recently talked to a program director who was concerned about a student who had failed, not passed the exam. And I said, well, the student can retake the course for free. And it's like, oh, and because sometimes after you have to take the exam, the course is sometimes more meaningful. I am very proud that we had over 4,500 students participate in our 2021 courses, 167. And I was also very pleased this number that actually completed the course eval, because in 2021, people were pretty zoomed out at that point. And I'm very pleased that, over 97% both for the OT and the OTA prep course said that they would recommend the course. Therapy Ed does offer personal tutoring. Okay. For an overview of that, you can go to our YouTube channel. And there's a very good YouTube presentation by Paula Carey. And there's also a presentation about the online assessment exams on YouTube. I forgot to put the link there. That goes into much more detail about how you can use them in your curriculum. We do have online office hours every Tuesday evening, and they include content reviews by a therapy ed instructor, and has time for people to ask any question that they have about the exam and exam preparation. And these are free to open to anyone. This is an example. This is our 26-week content, and we rotate it every 26 weeks. So you can see we cover diversity of topics that are on the exam. We do have an exam item of the week that comes out on Thursdays that the students can also use, and you get the answer and rationale on Sundays. And during the office hours, the therapy and course instructor, who's a content expert about that topic that the exam item is related to, can provide more information. And I want to talk about our recorded resources. Let your students know this stuff is free, and it's good. The review sessions that are held every Tuesday night are posted in 2 weeks, and they remain online for a month. And they've often remained online for longer than a month. Often there's like 6 to 9 sessions up there, just because, limited staff. This is a small family-run business. So, sometimes the things don't get taken down, but that's to the benefit of the students. These are things that are permanently available. And I'd like to highlight very much Donna Coster has done a wonderful presentation of mindfulness related to certification exam preparation, which is very, very helpful for students for de-stressing. And then these are just the different, frequently asked questions, enabling success, how to use the review and study guide, personal tutoring, and exam prep course. And then for you as educators, we also have these permanently available. The pragmatic guides that Marlene and I just did about how to use information to facilitate curriculum development and certification exam success. Talking about the online assessment exams and practice exams that I did as presentation last spring on that. Teaching learning strategies is something I did for last year, the 2021 Education Summit. So these are all available free, and this session will be available for free. And I apologize for going over the time. So let me look in the chat box. Oh no, not the, let me just look. Okay, hold on. Let me just see. I'll go up all the way. When I said for free, it's a therapy ed exam prep course you can take for free, not the MBCOT exam. The MBCOT, if you fail, you need to repay. That's why it's expensive. That's why we want to pass on the first time. We have philosophy at therapy ed. Invest in the course, which gets you the book and get you the manual. Okay. Attend the free sessions. One and done. Okay. Okay, yeah. The 1 minute or less per test item is the length that I take the OT course exam, except for recommendation. Okay, the thing about timing about course exams and even the type of course exams, and this is what I'm going to talk about when I did about not teaching for the test, is we need to think about what is the purpose of tests. And early in a curriculum, we should not be doing MBCOT like exam items, nor have MBCOT exam expectations. Because I'm still just learning the difference between proprioception and kinesthesia. I'm still just learning those basics. I'm learning the basics of what's innovated by C5 versus what's innovated at C7. So I think that the less than a minute per really can, and I know I've talked to a couple of program directors because the press is we need to add more MBCOT-like exam items in our curriculum. I know that's a very big press because I'm always asked, do you have some? Do you have some? And I've often talked to people say, hold off on that a bit. Don't put them in immediately early in your curriculum because students have to develop that foundational knowledge. Later in the curriculum, add a couple. And they were relieved, like, really, we don't need to add that much? It's like, no, because your job, and I'll quote Kathy Gollitz from Mercy College. When I first started teaching there was the fieldwork coordinator, and Joan Taglio went to school with at NYU, was the program director. Joan is the dean now, and Kathy's the associate dean. When I first started going there, and this is probably 20 years ago, it's probably one of the first courses I did, Kathy would go and she would always introduce me to the students and say, we prepare you for practice. Reader prepares you for the test. And I think that's an important thing. You need to prepare students to be the best practitioner. Now, do we want to give them a sense of what these unique exam items will be and the time that, they need to be? Yes. But that should be later in the curriculum, and it should be not the entire test. It should just be like an introduction. They'll have plenty of time for learning exam prep and for practicing these. Our book has 12 hours of practice exams. 600 questions on the CODA 510 and 9 CSTs. And there's a point where there's only so many questions you can take before your head starts to spin. So I think, you really need to think about where in the curriculum it is. Now, if you're doing this as a cumulative test, like, using our OLX at the end where you're doing C, I definitely think doing that a couple times to let them get knowing that they need to do this timing is great. But in the course, I don't know how your students do with this, but I do know the programs I've talked to who started doing more rigid with the timing and more MBCOT-like exam items throughout the curriculum. Students were really upset because they were not happy with the grades and they were angry. And, we need to not teach for the test. Now, what I do say is when you say that don't do more than double time or time and a half, from the minute, if you have a 50 item exam, and your class is an hour, and it's fairly straightforward, that's okay. Maybe make it a 40 item. But if you have like a 40 item in an hour class and someone's saying, can I have 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes, 5 minutes, say no. Or say, do you need a combination? The other thing that I'm a firm believer in to help to integrate into our programs is, and I know because of time press, a lot of people don't do this, but I also know from talking to program directors that you can do this, now through the interactive, online stuff, is do review your course test with people. Why something was more right than another. Learning that, C was wrong and I want to argue with you. And if students argue with you, don't change the item. Don't say, okay, everybody's C, you get the credit. That's not good because MBCOT doesn't take phone calls on Monday saying it could have been C. Say to everybody, you know what? This doesn't count for anybody. I'm going to rewrite and then rewrite the test question to make sure it's clear that A is best. But then take the time to review with the students why A was better. Why was A the better choice? Now they may, and what happens is students will add in field work. They'll add their cousin. They'll say, what about this? And what about this? The second guess the thing, the philosopher. And one of the presentations I have recorded, I go into those a lot more. And it's like, it's not what about this and what about this? You need to pick the best out of the choices and you can't add extra information. So those type of things, because you can't add information to MBCOT exam. Those are good things to do. Again, I don't want to say an absolute no, but I would be cautious as to where in the development they are in their learning before I did a rigid, 1 minute. And the MBCOT exam, I forgot to add that in there because I was talking about more like preparing students to succeed, the time management. But I think it was like 1 minute, 4 seconds for the multiple choices and 1 minute, like 18 seconds for the 6 option. And I'm forgetting now the CSTs, but they were, they did have that data. And we advise the students to average a minute per exam item. So, and then for the multiple choices, and then a minute, 30 seconds for the 6 option, and 40 seconds for the 3 option ones for the 6 option on the CODA. And if the CST items, 10 to 12 minutes for each CST item, because that then gives you a bank of time if you do that timing of 40 minutes at the end, 34 to 40 minutes at the end for the harder questions and to take a break. So that's what we advise students during the course. Any other questions? I'm open to questions. I do want to show my references, so I'm going to do, and I can say if people have any. All right, hold on. Did you see? I think it's open books for applied knowledge and 6C. Julie, do you want to shout out your thought? Because I think this is good, and I think people have heard enough of me talking.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, I find that I tend to lean towards open book tests because I really want to see their clinical reasoning. But I'm questioning myself because I'm wondering if particularly this generation of student has a hard time with memorization and I'm not giving them the opportunity to practice that skill.
I think a balance is needed. I personally agree with you. I love giving treatment plans, and seeing their reasoning and how they analyze activity and everything. I do think having somewhere in the curriculum that each semester they have a couple objective tests where they have to memorize is really important. And that's why students from problem-based learning programs have issues because they've never memorized. And if I have to memorize all the content that is tested on the exam for the first time as I'm preparing for the exam, that's overwhelming. If you just, and again, I would suggest people get the therapy ed review, and I'll talk about some more on November 15th, but get the therapy ed book, and I know programs have done this, and go through, and everything that's an exam hint or a table that says this is must know information. And as Doug from Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences in Manchester says, they have a copy on manual because we do course there every year, and they go through the manual. And anything that we say is must know, somewhere along the line, you should have the students memorize it. The Rancho scale, Allen's levels, spinal cord levels, wheelchair measurements. I mean, there's so much data. And again, that's why those 6 students failed. They knew all that stuff conceptually. They were coders who had been working for years. They reviewed it all. The problem is on that exam, to complete it in the time that's needed, I need to know that it's ulnar Palmer, radial Palmer. I need to know that sequence. I need to know that C5 is universal cuff, C6 is stenodesis. I need to know where to add to. I need to know where to subtract to. On wheelchair measurement. So yeah, I would say make sure you have some memorization and that they are required, even if it's even just, quizzes, that they have to memorize, quizzes, because you don't want to overemphasize it, but that quizzes count for 30% of the grades. They're not going to fail if they don't do well on the quizzes, but if they don't do well, it's going to drop them down a grade. So instead of from A to B, B to C, they'll start memorizing. So I think it has to be meaningful enough where we see a change. And I think, to be honest, not being comfortable with memorizing, wanting to memorize it. I know I was in school a long time ago. I graduated OT school a very long time ago, like 43 years ago. And when I had my prereq, so that's like 7 years ago. I remember I was a commuter student going from Staten Island to NYU because I got a scholarship there, but I was a commuter student. Thank goodness I had that ferry, that bus, the ferry, bus, subway, because I had a struggle to memorize. It was not my forte, but I did. So yeah, I would look at it. I would definitely look at it. Other questions? Okay. All right. I hope that this session, and I'm going to have a few final thoughts, provided you with greater understanding of the factors that contribute to academic and certification exam difficulties, the test taken personalized can hinder exam success and contribute to development of ineffective habits, how we can mitigate factors that can contribute to exam failure and support development of effective exam prep and test taking capabilities, especially TAMA TAs for eligible students, and resources that can support and help you. As educators commit to student success, I respectfully ask you, along with their team, to consider the following questions before you recommend certification exam products to your students or buy them for your program. So we ask that you say, does the exam preparation product include current and accurate information about NBCOT's OTR and CODA certification exams content, format, and procedures? Is it comprehensive and organized, and is the content well integrated so it directly relates to the content outline that the NBCOT has put forth for the OTR and CODA certification exams? Does it provide effective test taking management, time management, and test taking strategies to help them correctly answer exam items and successfully complete the exam within the allotted time? Does it have practice exams that accurately present the different types of exam items that will be required, not just multiple choices on the exams? And are there real-time experiential learning activities and individualized live supports? And most important, because I'm very proud of our team, are the product providers experienced, well-regarded educators with established reputations for excellence, integrity, and service to the profession? I and the therapy ed team is very proud that the quality of our products and resources and the expertise of our course instructors and contributors will enable you to firmly say yes to each of the above questions. Save the date and spread the word. On Tuesday, November 15th, 7 to 8:30. We'll be doing embedding NBCOT exam success into curriculum, not teaching for the test, an exploration of effective program development evaluation strategies. In April, Kara Inda will be doing her presentation on constructing exam items to enhance academic certification exam performance. These emails about the webinars and their descriptions will be sent to program directors approximately 2 weeks before the date. And if you personally want to receive this, because I know some program directors are overwhelmed and may not communicate everything that they get in their emails. So if you want to receive a personal invitation, just email me at rpcot 1904@gmail.com. Have any further questions, again, about purchasing products and resources, about hosting a course, getting group discounts for the scoring, scheduling the online assessment exam, contact Betty Pendry at bpendry@therapyed. If you have any questions about the effective use of TherapyEd's resources, how to integrate into curriculum, the questions you had, and I see there's more in the chat box, so I will go back to them. Please contact me at, again, rpc1904@gmail, and I will now be looking at the chat box and see if there's any further questions. All right, I'm glad that people found it informative. All right. I hope to see more of you on November 15th. And I am very pleased that we were able to go through this. And again, if there is any information that you need, please feel free to contact me or Betsy. And here are my references that will again be posted. This will be posted on YouTube, so you'll be able to review them. So thank you very much and have a good evening.